So far, we have solved many important problems by using cryptography. The first thing that we solved was confidentiality. Remember that we talk about symmetric key cryptography, and by using block ciphers or stream ciphers, we provided encryption, and this solved the problem of confidentiality. And recently, we solved the problem of authentication by using message authentication codes. So now, natural question to ask is, can we provide the both at the same time? So can we have an algorithm that provides both confidentiality and authentication? And this is called actually authenticated encryption. And the answer is yes, we can do it. And there are many different variants. So you can use a block cipher just for this, or you can use a block cipher and combine it with the hash function to provide both confidentiality and authentication. But also you can have a dedicated algorithm just designed for authenticated encryption. So these will be the topics that we are going to talk now. So let's start with some definitions. Message authentication code is computed as a result of a complete pass over the data. If we provide both encryption and authentication, then we may require two passes over the data, but this way we provide authenticated encryption. So we can combine these two operations to provide authenticated encryption that we shorten as AE. And here is a picture of what is going on. So our aim is to have an authenticated encryption algorithm here, which takes this time 4 inputs. Of course, the most important one is the secret key. Then you need nonce, plain text. Nonce is the random value that is generated for that communication, which should be used only once, but it is not a secret value. We have the plain text, that is the thing that we want to encrypt, and we may sometimes have associated data. Associated data is the data that you are not going to encrypt, but still we have to authenticate it. So as you can see, these are the inputs of this algorithm, and as the output, you would have the ciphertext, and also you would have a tag. And this tag would allow us to check the authentication. So idea is this. So our aim is to now design an authenticated encryption algorithm that can do this. So let's talk about associated data first. We may need some information like headers to be authenticated but not encrypted. Thus, the authenticated information can be processed before the decryption of the entire message. Such schemes are called authenticated encryption with associated data, shortened as AEAD. And we may prefer these two operations to be performed in parallel. In other words, both encryption and the verification of the associated data. We may prefer these operations to be online. Namely, we can start performing the encryption and authentication operations as soon as some parts of the message is available without the knowledge of the entire message or its length. So these are the things actually that was considered during an authenticated encryption competition, which I'm going to talk at the last slides. So let's see what people use in practice. One famous mode of operation that is actually an authenticated encryption model is CCM mode. So this is counter with cipher blockchaining message authentication code, sometimes referred to as cbc-mac. So this is a two-pass block cipher mode. By two-pass, as we mentioned before, we are actually processing the data twice, one for encryption, one for authentication. But this doesn't have to be always like this. So we will see some algorithms that actually does this on a single pass. This is IEEE standard for wireless LANs, and it appears in this special publication. And it sounds like this. After this operation, the tag is concatenated to the end of the ciphertext. So when you are using this operation, you always know the final part is the tag. So here's a picture how it works. So here MIs are the messages that you are going to encrypt. Sorry, yes, encrypt and actually authenticate. So in this top picture, we see the authentication, and in the bottom one, we see the encryption. So Assume that we have an encryption algorithm, for instance, AES, using 128-bit key. So for authentication, we use this block cipher as if we are going to perform CBC encryption, but instead of encryption, as you can see, we are not producing any ciphertext here. So we are just chaining all these encryptions and at the end provide a tag. And then in parallel, we perform encryption using the counter mode. Here we are incrementing counters. We are performing encryption and then XOR it with the plaintext that we are going to encrypt. So we obtain the ciphertext from here. As you can see here, this is the first pass of the data and this is the second pass of the data. This part can be parallelized since this is a counter mode of operation, but this is CBC, so it has to be serial. You cannot parallelize this part. But at the end, you obtain the ciphertext here. Take this tag, concatenate it at the end of this ciphertext, and you have obtained both encryption and authentication. A better version of this is called GCM mode. This is Galois counter mode. This is somewhat better. I will explain why it is in the following slide and compare these two modes. But the picture is as follows. You again have the counter mode. You perform encryption of the counters, XOR it with plaintext, and obtain ciphertext blocks. So these are your ciphertext blocks. In this picture, we have only 2 blocks. If you don't have any associated data here, you can just think that this part does not exist. You obtain ciphertext blocks here, but you also XOR them together, and at the end perform an initial encryption with the counter 0 and XOR it with 2 and obtain the authentication tag. As you can see, in this case, we are performing a single pass over the data. But if you have also associated data, here refers to as auth data, which is the data that need to be authenticated but not going to be encrypted. So you take the authenticated data blocks here and combine them with the ciphertext here, XORing. Here the mult means multiplication. This is a simple multiplication operation in the Galois field. So the data is referred to as a polynomial, and you can think that this is as if a polynomial multiplication modulo some polynomial again. So this operation is really simple compared to this encryption operation. So at the end, here you see that there is an XOR with len A and len C. Len A means the length of associated data. Len C means the length of the ciphertext data. So you XOR with 2 and obtain the authentication tag. So GCM mode is important because most probably this is what you are using all the time. You can also check the applications you are using and see which mode of operation and which, if in authenticated encryption, which mode they are using. So as far as I know, if you are using Zoom, Zoom is using AES 256 here in this GCM mode, sorry. So many other famous applications or platforms also use GCM mode. So it is like the most used authenticated encryption currently. So let's compare it CCM with GCM. If you look at CCM, CCM is available in OpenSSL, but disabled by default. So if you want to use it, you have to choose it by yourself. You have to enable it. Message authentication is done on the plaintext, not ciphertext. So this is important. Let me go back to the picture. As you can see, the authentication tag is produced from the message. So this is something we talked a lot before. Our aim is to not to provide any information about the plaintext. So here you are already using the plaintext for encryption. So performing another operation on the plaintext caused a lot of problems in many different algorithms and protocols. So for this reason, we want to be cautious when we are using plaintext data more than once. So this can be seen as a bad thing about CCM. Encryption and MAC can be done in parallel if there are 2 AES chips chips or 2 cores. So as you can see, again, go back to picture. If you are performing a software encryption, so if you have 2 cores, first core can do this and the second one can perform this. So in this way, you just wait for the encryption of a single AES encryption, but of course you use twice the system resource. Cannot be parallelized due to CBC, so you cannot parallelize the CBC part. But if you go to GCM, this is mandatory since TLS 1.2 and generally the default choice. It also appears in NIST standard, NIST special publication 800-38D. And message authentication is done on the ciphertext. So if you go back to picture again, as you can see, authentication data comes from the ciphertext and the tag is produced. So this is something we like. Performance cost is close to a single block cipher operation because those other multiplication operations in the Galois field are not this costly. So you don't need a second AES chip in this case. And it also provides parallelizable encryption and decryption because we are performing the encryption in the counter mode. So this is why GSM is superior to CCM. So if you have a choice, just choose GCM. There's no need to bother with CCM anymore. So in these pictures, all we have seen was using a single block cipher to provide both encryption and authentication. But we have other methods. One is called authenticated encryption with hash functions. So in this case, you use an encryption algorithm and the hash function together to obtain both authentication and encryption. So this following 3 methods were widely used: MAC and encrypt, MAC then encrypt, encrypt then MAC. So let's see pictures how this works. So let's start with MAC and encrypt. So in this case, again, as I told you, there is an encryption algorithm, for instance, AES, and there's a hash function, but we are going to use it as a keyed hash function. So you can, if you are choosing SHA-2 here, probably you will be using HMAC SHA-2, which takes the key and the plain text and provides some tag. So this picture is as follows. You take the plain text, encrypt it with your encryption algorithm and with your secret key to obtain ciphertext, but you also use the same secret key in your hash function and turn it into probably HMAC and provide the tag. So this method is adopted by SSH protocol. It is used there. And the second one is MAC then encrypt. If you go back to picture, in the MAC and encrypt, you use the plain text data and encryption and authentication done at the same time on the plain text. In the MAC then encrypt version, you first you provide the tag by using the hash function. You concatenate it at the end of your plain text, and then perform the encryption on the whole data and obtain a ciphertext. So this is used by TLS 1.2 and in the previous versions. But when we were talking about these, when they were in TLS 1.3, we said that TLS 1.3 is expected to support only authenticated encryption with associated data. So this was our assumption. And we also said that, I also said that at that time there was a Caesar competition going on, and I thought that one of the winners of that competition would be selected by TLS 1.3 as a standard. But it turned out to be wrong, because instead of the winners of that competition, in TLS 1.3 we have CHA-20 with poly authentication method, which we are going to see in a few slides later. So this is so most probably people are using still TLS 1.2. So this is one of the most used versions. But as you can see, in all of these 2 versions we have seen, this one and this one, the plain text data used in hash function and encryption, as I told you, we don't like this, because you don't need to. This might reveal some information about the plain text if there are some weaknesses in the hash function or the encryption algorithm. So this one we prefer more, which is called encrypt then MAC. ID is as follows. You take the plain text and perform encryption and obtain the ciphertext like this. Then you take the ciphertext and put it in the hash function and obtain the message authentication code. So as you can see now, the hash function uses the ciphertext data, not the plaintext data. So we believe that this is more secure against both privacy and integrity attacks. And more importantly, MAC can be verified before decrypting the whole ciphertext. So for instance, let's go back to the previous picture. So you said you received a ciphertext, but maybe this is a garbage. It is not from somebody you are communicating, but somebody is just performing an attack and sending you some random data. So in order to check if this is correct, in order to authenticate, you have to decrypt this and obtain plaintext and MAC. Then take this plaintext, perform a hash function operation and obtain the correct MAC and see if they match. And they won't match, so you will just get rid of this data. But for this, you spend a lot of system resources. But in the encrypt and MAC, you have the ciphertext and MAC. You just take the ciphertext, perform the hash function with the key operation, and check if the MACs, the authentication tags are the same. If they're not, then this means that the authentication is wrong. So you don't need to decrypt the whole data. So it is something we prefer. So let's go to TLS 1.3. In TLS 1.3, authenticated encryption with associated data now supports ChaCha20 with poly 1305. So you might think that why they added something else than AES. Actually, we probably answered this question before, but let me summarize it again. Intel processors since Westmere in 2010 come with AES hardware instructions, AES-NI, which make AES encryptions effectively free. So same is also available in AMD processors. So this actually now we have CPU instructions that can perform AES encryption. So it provides you hardware level encryption, which is a lot faster than any software implementation that you can do on a CPU. However, phones and tablets don't support AES-NI. So as far as I know, some new ARM processors going to have these instructions, but most of the ones we are using don't have. So AES is not that fast or system friendly when you are using it on a phone or a tablet. And since RC4 is broken, Google replaced it with ChaCha20 in Chrome around 2013. So when Google was communicating using Chrome with their services like Gmail and so on, when you're using a phone or tablet, they allowed ChaCha20 instead of AES for encryption. So this became like a trend, and in TLS 1.3, they also make ChaCha20 as an encryption algorithm choice, and when you combine it with this poly 1305, using both of them provides you authenticated encryption with associated data. I think this is a polynomial as 2 to the power 130 minus 5. This is why it is referred to this. And you can see the details of these algorithms if you prefer. So it is a better friendly alternative to AES GCM. So this is the whole idea. So if you're using a laptop or desktop, you can use AES GCM. You have very good performance. But on a tablet or a phone, you might choose ChaCha20 with poly 13.5. Okay, so these are the two main standards. But again, ChaCha is in TLS 1.3, and most probably a lot of servers or web pages are still using 1.2. So let's finalize this topic with some of the authenticated encryption competitions. There was a CSER competition, and CSER was it's an abbreviation for Competition for Authenticated Encryption, Security, Applicability, and Robustness. So it was announced in 2013, and the deadline for the first round submissions was 2014. A lot of algorithms are submitted to this competition, and the competition page is available here. You can see all of the details, the first round submissions, the second round candidates, and so on and so forth. And there is also an authenticated encryption zoo web page, which actually summarizes all of these algorithms and all of the attacks that are performed on these algorithms. So the second round candidates were announced in 2015. And I think, yes, in 2017, at the end of 2017, the final portfolio was announced, and it is this. So they divided it into 3 use cases. Case 1 was lightweight applications, case 2 high performance, and case 3 defense in depth. So for lightweight applications, for instance, 2 algorithms I think were selected, Acorn and Ascon being the first choice. And for the use case 2, we have Aegis and Morus and OCB. And for defense in depth, you have Calm and Deoxys 2. So these are the winners of the scissor competition, but as far as I know, so far none of them are standardized in any protocols or standards. But another competition is now going on, and this is NIST Lightweight Cryptography Standardization Competition. It was announced in 2015 because NIST realized that they have AES for encryption, and it is good almost in all platforms, but for very lightweight devices, it is a good thing to have another standard. So this competition started in 2015. Actually, the first workshop was held in 2015 to see if there's such a need. And after communications with the industry and academicians, and during these workshops, they, in 2018, in August, they provided a document, NIST report, saying which kind of requirements they have and which kind of evaluation criteria that they are going to use to choose the winner in this competition. And they said that the submission deadline was February 2019. So 56 algorithms, I think, was in the first round. Then in the second round, I think 32 of them was announced as the second round candidates. There were a few workshops. I think the last one was held virtually due to the pandemic. And just last week, they announced the finalists. So from 32 algorithms, I think now we have 10. Yes, and these are the 10 finalists in this competition, which was just announced like 1 week before. 1 week ago. So these finalists are Ascon, Elephant, GIFCOF B, Grain 128, AEAD, ICEP, Photon Beetle, Romulus, Sparkle, Tiny Jumbo, and Zodiac. So this is important because now we have like 1 or 2 years to choose the finalists. And NIST is expecting performance comparisons of these algorithms on many different platforms, but they're also expecting cryptanalysis results on these algorithms so that they can easily eliminate the bad ones and choose the best one as the winner, but maybe they might choose more than one winner. They haven't decided it yet, but it is a good idea to do research because these are very different algorithms. All of them uses, as far as I know, one pass over the data to provide authentication and encryption.